At precisely 7:59 a.m., the atmosphere in the sleek, glass-walled conference room shifted palpably as the CEO, a man known for his relentless ambition, issued a terse command to his IT department. "Cut the VPN access," he ordered, his voice steady and cold, devoid of any hint of hesitation. In that moment, he believed he was tightening his grip on the company's operations, convinced that severing the connection would quell the growing discontent among the executives who had started questioning his authority. The IT team sprang into action, fingers flying over keyboards, their expressions a mix of compliance and unease. They understood the implications of the order but recognized the power dynamics at play. Within moments, the digital lines connecting remote employees to the corporate network were severed, a swift and decisive move that echoed through the vast infrastructure of the company. The immediate consequences were palpable. Notifications popped up on the screens of dozens of employees, each one met with confusion and frustration. Teams that relied on seamless communication were cut off from essential resources, their productivity grinding to a halt. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the virtual offices like a storm brewing on the horizon. As the clock ticked past 8, the mood shifted from confusion to anger. Executives began to gather in the conference room, their faces etched with concern. The CEO, however, remained unfazed, his mind racing with thoughts of control and authority. He believed he had won a decisive victory, one that would send a clear message about the consequences of questioning his decisions. But as the minutes stretched on, the tension in the room thickened. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado quickly fading. They were aware that the CEO's actions might have dire repercussions, though none dared to voice their fears aloud. Instead, they sat in silence, waiting for the next move, each one acutely aware of the precarious balance of power that hung in the air, unaware that the real game was just beginning. Unbeknownst to the CEO and his executives, the true power within the organization lay not in the hands of the man issuing orders, but rather in the vast, intricate network of the company's $1.1 billion cloud system. This system, a marvel of modern technology, was not merely a resource for data storage and retrieval. It was a living entity, designed to adapt and respond to the needs of the business while maintaining a level of security that was both impenetrable and unyielding. The main character, though shrouded in ambiguity, had woven their influence into the very fabric of this cloud infrastructure. They had been the architect behind its design, the silent force ensuring that it not only met the demands of the company but also anticipated them. Every line of code, every protocol embedded within the system, was a testament to their foresight and understanding of the corporate landscape. While the CEO reveled in his perceived victory, believing he had silenced dissent by severing access, the main character remained calm and collected. They knew that the cloud system held the keys to the kingdom, keys that were now more vital than ever. With the VPN cut, the executives were isolated, but the main character had built contingencies into the system that would ensure operations could continue seamlessly, unaffected by the CEO's misguided actions. As the executives sat in the dimly lit conference room, their expressions a mix of anger and confusion, the main character remained watching from the shadows, a figure unseen yet omnipotent. The cloud system had already begun rerouting critical functions to bypass the VPN restrictions, a move that would soon unveil the limitations of the CEO's authority. The executives were still oblivious to the fact that their attempts to regain control over the situation were futile. The main character had anticipated their every move. Suddenly, notifications began flooding in on the executives' devices, a cascade of alerts signaling that operations were not just continuing, but thriving despite the cut. Confusion morphed into dread as they realized the CEO's drastic measure was not the panacea he believed it to be. The main character's hidden power was now on the verge of revelation, and the room began to buzz with the realization that the CEO's grip on the company was slipping. The executives exchanged frantic glances, their earlier bravado replaced by unease. They had expected the cut to be a decisive blow, one that would quell any unrest and reassert the CEO's dominance. Instead, they were witnessing the beginning of a narrative in which they were not the protagonists, but rather pawns in a game that had been orchestrated long before they had even entered the room. The tension built palpably as they began to grasp the implications of the main character's hidden capabilities, realizing that the balance of power was shifting and the stakes had never been higher. As the notifications continued to flood the executives' devices, a wave of panic swept through the conference room. The CEO, who had been basking in what he thought was a triumphant moment, suddenly found himself surrounded by silence that felt heavy and foreboding. He glanced at his team, searching for reassurance, but all he saw were faces pale with realization. "What the hell is happening?" one executive finally blurted out, breaking the oppressive quiet. His voice trembled, an echo of the anxiety that had begun to grip the room. The others shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence shattered like glass. The CEO's brow furrowed as he attempted to maintain his composure. "They must be using backup systems," he declared, though even he could hear the uncertainty in his own words. "Shut them down." But the IT department, still reeling from the abrupt severance of the VPN, looked at each other in confusion. They had been following orders without question, but now they were caught in a web of unexpected consequences. As the minutes ticked by, the data streaming onto the executive screens revealed a shocking narrative. Operations were running smoothly, even thriving, despite the CEO's drastic actions. Teams that had been cut off were suddenly accessing files, communicating seamlessly, and continuing their work as if nothing had changed. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that filled the room. "This can't be right," another executive said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We cut the VPN, there should be no access." The CEO clenched his jaw, a mixture of anger and confusion boiling beneath the surface. He had believed he was making a bold statement, a show of force that would re-establish his authority and quell any dissent. Yet here he stood, facing an insurrection he had underestimated, his own actions backfiring spectacularly. A few moments later, an alert popped up on the CEO's own device, a grim reminder that he was losing control. The main character's influence had woven itself through the very core of the company's operations, rendering the CEO's orders ineffective. It was as if the very systems he had sought to cripple were mocking him, thriving in the face of his misguided attempts to assert dominance. The executives' faces fell as the realization dawned upon them. They were not merely witnesses to a minor setback, they were caught in a larger scheme, one that had been set in motion long before they had gathered to pledge their loyalty to the CEO. They had assumed they were players in a game of strategy, but instead they were pawns being maneuvered by an unseen hand. As the cloud system continued to operate with an eerie efficiency, the main character, hidden from view, observed the unfolding drama with a sense of calm. Their influence was the silent force guiding the company through the storm, anticipating every rash decision made by the CEO. They had long ago built in redundancies and contingencies, ensuring that even in moments of crisis, the company's pulse would not falter. The tension in the room escalated and the air grew thick with uncertainty. The executives, realizing they were trapped in a web of their own making, began to question their allegiances. Who had the real power? The man who issued orders from the head of the table, or the unseen architect who had designed the very infrastructure that now rendered those orders meaningless? As the clock ticked on, the CEO's confidence unraveled further. He stood up, attempting to rally his team. "We need to regain control. This is unacceptable." His voice echoed against the walls, but the conviction behind it waned as confusion reigned. The executives, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, exchanged glances, weighing their options. They were no longer convinced that siding with the CEO was the safest path. The main character's quiet dominance had sown the seeds of doubt, and the executives felt the ground beneath them shifting. In that moment, the false sense of victory that had enveloped the CEO began to dissipate. As the executives' expressions morphed from fear to determination, the main character's plan was in motion, ready to reveal the truth lurking in the shadows. The game was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. With each passing second, the delicate balance of power continued to tilt, setting the stage for a reckoning that none of them could have anticipated. As the digital alerts continued to cascade across the executive screens, the atmosphere in the conference room grew increasingly charged with tension. The CEO, still clinging to a thread of authority, tried to mask his rising panic. His eyes flitted from one executive to another, searching for a glimmer of support, but all he found were faces twisted in confusion and disbelief. The realization that their CEO's command had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly settled heavily over the group. The once confident executives, who had rallied behind the CEO's audacious decision, now found themselves grappling with the terrifying implications of their predicament. The realization that they were trapped in a system they did not fully understand gnawed at them, a reminder of their own vulnerability. "What did we miss?" one executive whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their collective ignorance. The CEO, a master of manipulation, suddenly seemed powerless against the very system he had sought to dominate. Amidst the chaos, the main character observed from the shadows, their presence a silent testament to the unseen power that had been woven into the fabric of the company's operations. They had anticipated this moment, foreseeing the CEO's desperate attempt to reassert control and the inevitable fallout that would follow. The cloud system, a marvel of engineering, was designed not just to function under normal circumstances but to thrive under duress, and now it was proving its worth. As the executives began to realize that their access was not merely a fluke, the atmosphere shifted. A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the group. The CEO's attempts to regain control were met with growing resistance as the executives processed the implications of their situation. They had believed themselves to be players in a game of corporate chess, but they were merely pawns caught in a much larger strategy orchestrated by the main character. "We need to find out who is behind this," the CEO barked, desperation creeping into his voice. The urgency in his tone only intensified the fear bubbling beneath the surface. The IT department, previously loyal and obedient, exchanged glances, their loyalty now wavering in the face of undeniable evidence that their leader was losing grip. The digital alerts continued to flash, each one a reminder of how the main character had turned the tables, transforming a calculated strike into an unforeseen advantage. The team that had once felt the sting of isolation was now thriving, accessing files and communicating across the cloud infrastructure as if the VPN cut had never happened. "We might have to consider alternatives," one executive suggested hesitantly, her voice trembling as the weight of their reality settled in. The notion of turning against the CEO, once unthinkable, now hovered tantalizingly close. The CEO's face darkened, anger flaring at the suggestion. "We're not turning on one another," he snapped, yet his words lacked the conviction they had once held. The tension in the room was palpable, a tightrope walk between loyalty and survival. In that moment of indecision, the main character's influence grew more pronounced. They had meticulously crafted contingencies within the cloud system, ensuring that the company could operate independently of the CEO's erratic commands. As the executives felt the ground shifting beneath them, the main character reveled in the control they had established, a chess master watching as the pieces were moved with precision. Time seemed to stretch as they awaited the next move. The CEO's bravado was faltering, and the executives were beginning to question everything. The main character's carefully laid plans were about to come to fruition, and the consequences of the CEO's earlier decisions loomed large. As the CEO grasped at straws, seeking to regain the narrative, the main character knew that the moment of truth was near. They could almost taste the shift in power, the realization that the CEO was no longer the architect of their fate. The executives were beginning to see through the veil of authority, understanding that the true power lay not in the boardroom, but in the intricate web of the cloud system that had been designed to withstand such challenges. Finally, a moment of clarity broke through the confusion. One of the executives stood up, her voice steadying as she addressed the room. "We need to reevaluate our position. This isn't just about the CEO's orders anymore. It's about survival. We need to support whichever system ensures our continuity." The room fell silent, the weight of her words resonating with an undeniable truth. The shift was palpable, a collective realization dawning upon them. In that moment, the dynamics of power had irrevocably changed. The CEO, once the unquestioned leader, now stood at the precipice of losing everything he had fought to maintain. The main character watched, a sense of satisfaction washing over them. They had orchestrated this moment, a quiet storm that had been brewing beneath the surface. The CEO's authority was crumbling, and with it, his carefully constructed facade. The executives were no longer mere spectators. They were beginning to reclaim their agency, no longer willing to be pawns in a game they did not control. As the realization solidified among the executives, the main character prepared to step from the shadows. The truth was about to be unveiled, and the repercussions of the CEO's actions would echo throughout the company. The aftermath would be a reckoning, a moment where power dynamics would shift irrevocably, and the true architect of the company's resilience would be revealed. In that charged atmosphere, the main character knew that the time had come to reveal the reality of the situation, to unveil the control they had woven into the very fabric of the organization, and to ensure that the consequences of the CEO's choices were laid bare for all to see. The storm was here, and it was time for the truth to emerge from the shadows. As the main character prepared to step into the light, the silence in the conference room thickened. The executives, who had once rallied behind the CEO, now stood on the precipice of a new understanding. The realization that they had been maneuvered into a corner by their own leader began to dawn upon them, their previous trust fracturing under the weight of the truth. The main character had built the cloud system not just as a technical marvel, but as a safeguard against the very type of tyranny the CEO had attempted to impose. Every protocol, every line of code was designed with foresight, anticipating moments like this where the balance of power could shift unexpectedly. With a calm resolve, the main character stepped forward, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos that had enveloped the room. The executives turned, eyes wide, as they prepared to confront the architect of their salvation. "You thought you could cut us off, didn't you?" the main character began, their voice steady and unwavering. You believed that severing the VPN would demonstrate your authority, that it would silence dissent and restore your control, but you underestimated the power of the infrastructure I created. Your actions have only illuminated the cracks in your foundation. The CEO, who had once appeared invincible, now shifted uncomfortably, the hue of his confidence drained. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, desperation creeping into his voice. "This isn't a game." The main character continued, unfazed. "Isn't it? You wielded power like a weapon, but the true power lies in the systems you sought to dominate. You failed to recognize that while you may sever connections, the core of this organization cannot be dismantled so easily. It thrives on resilience, adaptability, and foresight. All qualities you've disregarded in your pursuit of control." The executives shifted uneasily, the tide of loyalty turning against the CEO. They began to see the reality of their situation. A leader clinging to power through fear rather than fostering collaboration. You've alienated your team, and in doing so, you've made them pawns in a game of your own making, the main character continued, their voice gaining strength. "But now they see the truth. They see me, the architect of our resilience. They understand that the future of this company lies not in fear, but in the unity and innovation our cloud system fosters. You cannot lead through division and expect loyalty in return." The atmosphere shifted as executives exchanged glances, the bonds of loyalty to the CEO weakening. The main character's words resonated, striking chords of understanding and empowerment among them. The CEO stammered, but the main character raised a hand, silencing him. "No more words, you've had your chance. Now it's time for accountability. You will face the consequences of your actions. The executives deserve a leader who inspires, not one who instills fear, and it's time to embrace that change." The room filled with a tension that was electric. The executives stood on the brink of a new alliance, one forged in the recognition of shared values rather than subservience. They began to gather around the main character, a silent agreement forming among them. The power dynamics that had once been firmly in the CEO's favor were shifting, like the winds before a storm. As the main character surveyed the room, a wave of satisfaction washed over them. They had orchestrated this moment, watching as the CEO's authority unraveled before their eyes. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. It had emerged, ready to reshape the landscape of the company. The executives had begun to reclaim their agency, their voices rising as one against the tyranny they had endured. With each passing moment, the main character felt the weight of the future pressing down upon them. They were no longer merely a figure in the shadows. They were the beacon of hope leading the charge toward a new beginning. In the midst of the upheaval, the CEO's final attempts to regain control fell flat, his voice drowned out by the collective resolve of the executives. No longer would they be pawns in a game of manipulation. They were ready to embrace change, to rally behind a leader who could guide them toward a future built on collaboration and innovation. As the conference room buzzed with renewed energy and determination, the main character's reflection on the event crystallized. This was not merely a victory over the CEO. It was a testament to the power dynamics in the workplace, a reminder that true authority is earned through respect and unity, not fear and manipulation. The main character understood that this moment was just the beginning. The implications of the CEO's actions would echo throughout the organization, a warning to those who wield power irresponsibly. They had witnessed the fragility of authority, the ease with which it could crumble under the weight of truth. With a final glance towards the executives, the main character felt a sense of justice wash over them. They had fought not just for themselves, but for the integrity of the company and its people. The future held promise, a chance to redefine what leadership meant, to foster an environment where collaboration replaced fear. As the meeting drew to a close, the executives stood united, ready to chart a new course. The main character stepped back, satisfied that the truth had prevailed. They had played their part in this intricate game, and now it was time for a new era to dawn. In that moment, the main character resolved to ensure that the lessons learned would not be forgotten. The power dynamics had shifted,